The missile warning system screamed its electronic death song as Captain Sarah Mitchell watched her F-22 Raptor disintegrate around her. 28,000 feet above the Iraqi desert, she had 3 seconds to make a choice that would determine whether she lived or died. What happened next would turn a routine reconnaissance mission into a 36-hour nightmare that would test every skill she'd learned in 12 years of flying America's deadliest fighter jets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of September 15, 2019, started like any other at Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates. Captain Sarah Mitchell finished her pre-flight checklist with the mechanical precision of someone who had performed these rituals over 800 times. Her F-22 Raptor, tail number 054087, sat gleaming under the desert sun, its angular stealth coating absorbing the early morning light like a predator waiting to strike. Sarah had been flying combat missions for over a decade, but this particular sortie felt different. Intelligence reports suggested unusual activity along the Iraq-Syria border, and her mission was straightforward: conduct aerial reconnaissance over a suspected weapons cache and relay coordinates back to base. Simple. Clean. The kind of mission that should have her back in time for the afternoon briefing. As she taxied toward the runway, Sarah's radio crackled with final clearance from the tower. Her squadron commander, Colonel Jake Harrison, had emphasized the importance of this mission during the morning briefing. Satellite imagery showed convoy movements that didn't match any known coalition or Iraqi government operations. Someone was moving heavy equipment through the desert, and the command needed eyes on target. The takeoff was flawless. Sarah felt the familiar rush as 22,000 pounds of thrust launched her skyward, the G-forces pressing her deep into her ejection seat. Within minutes, she was cruising at 35,000 feet, invisible to radar, and virtually undetectable to anything flying below her. The Raptor was the apex predator of modern warfare, and Sarah was one of only 200 pilots in the world qualified to fly it. The flight path took her northeast across the Arabian Peninsula, then north along the Iraqi border. Below, the landscape transformed from the organized infrastructure of the UAE to the vast emptiness of the Iraqi desert. Scattered settlements appeared as tiny clusters of brown squares against an endless sea of sand and rock. 2 hours into the mission, Sarah reached her designated reconnaissance area. Her advanced radar systems immediately began cataloging targets below. What she found made her blood run cold. The intelligence reports had been conservative. This wasn't just a weapons cache or a small convoy operation. Spread across 15 square miles of desert was what appeared to be a major staging area for a large-scale military operation. Heavy trucks, armored vehicles, and what looked like missile launchers were arranged in defensive positions around a central command area. Sarah counted at least 40 vehicles, far more than any local militia should possess. Her onboard cameras began recording everything, but she knew she needed to get closer for detailed identification. That's when her threat detection system lit up like a Christmas tree. Spike, 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 the automated warning system announced, indicating that multiple surface-to-air missile systems had locked onto her aircraft. Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She banked hard left, deploying chaff and flares while diving toward a lower altitude. The F-22's stealth technology was supposed to make her invisible, but somehow they had detected her presence. The first missile streaked past her left wing, missing by less than 50 feet. Sarah pulled into a climbing turn, trying to use her altitude advantage to escape the engagement envelope of the ground-based systems. Her radar warning receiver was screaming warnings about multiple missile launches, and she realized with growing horror that she had stumbled into a sophisticated air defense network. The second missile detonated close enough to rock her aircraft violently. Warning lights cascaded across her instrument panel as hydraulic systems failed and her flight controls became sluggish. Sarah fought to maintain control, but she knew her stealth fighter had been transformed into a wounded bird struggling to stay airborne. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Viper 77, she transmitted over the emergency frequency. "I am taking heavy SAM fire and have sustained significant damage, requesting immediate assistance." The response from her base was immediate but not encouraging. "Viper 77, we copy your Mayday. Be advised you are beyond the range of immediate support." Recommend you egress to the south and attempt to reach friendly territory. Sarah banked toward the south, but her damaged aircraft was losing altitude rapidly. The hydraulic failure had compromised her ability to maintain level flight, and she estimated she had perhaps 10 minutes of flying time remaining. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly in all directions, offering no friendly faces or safe landing zones. That's when the third missile found its mark. The explosion tore through her left engine, sending a shudder through the entire airframe that Sarah felt in her bones. Flames erupted from the engine bay and her fire suppression systems activated automatically. The F-22 began a slow roll to the left that she couldn't correct, and her altimeter unwound with increasing speed. At 8,000 feet, Sarah made the decision that would save her life and begin her nightmare. She reached between her legs and pulled the yellow and black striped ejection handles. The canopy explosive bolts fired with a sharp crack, and a split second later, her ACS-2 ejection seat rocketed her clear of the disintegrating aircraft. The parachute deployment was textbook perfect, but as Sarah drifted down through the morning air, she could see enemy vehicles already converging on her projected landing site. Dust plumes marked their approach across the desert floor, and she realized that her ordeal was just beginning. She landed hard in a shallow wadi about 3 miles from the enemy staging area, her parachute dragging her several yards before she managed to activate the quick-release mechanism. Her survival training took over immediately. First priority, assess injuries and secure equipment. Second priority, establish communications and call for rescue. Third priority, evade capture at all costs. Sarah's left ankle had been twisted during landing, but it would bear weight. Her survival kit contained water for 3 days, energy bars, a radio, flares, and a sidearm with 3 magazines. Standard equipment for a downed pilot, but woefully inadequate for what she was about to face. Her handheld radio crackled to life as she tried to contact rescue forces. Any station. Any station. This is Viper 77. I am down and mobile, approximately 15 miles northeast of Checkpoint Delta. Request immediate extraction. The response came not from friendly forces, but from voices speaking Arabic. They had her radio frequency and were attempting to triangulate her position. Sarah switched off the radio and began moving south, staying low in the wadi and using whatever cover she could find. Behind her, black smoke rose from the wreckage of her F-22 Raptor, marking the spot where $24 million of American technology had been reduced to twisted metal and burned composite materials. But Sarah Mitchell was alive, armed, and absolutely determined to make it home. The desert sun climbed higher, and her real fight for survival was about to begin. The first gunshot cracked across the desert at 11:47 a.m., exactly 2 hours after Sarah's ejection. She pressed herself flat against the rocky wall of the wadi, her heart hammering as voices echoed from multiple directions. They had found her parachute. Through the sparse desert brush, she could see at least 8 armed men spreading out in a search pattern. They wore a mixture of military fatigues and civilian clothing, but their weapons were uniformly modern. Alaska 74S RPGs and what appeared to be American-made M4 carbines. This wasn't a ragtag militia. These men moved with the coordination of trained soldiers. Sarah checked her Beretta M915 rounds plus 2 spare magazines. 45 bullets against an unknown number of enemies in open terrain. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. She needed to disappear, and she needed to do it now. Moving in a low crouch, she followed the wadi eastward, away from the search teams. The rocky depression provided cover, but it also channeled her movement in predictable directions. After 20 minutes of careful progress, she reached a point where the wadi forked. To the left, it continued southeast toward what looked like a distant road. To the right, it curved back toward the north and the enemy staging area she had been photographing when they shot her down. The logical choice was southeast, toward potential rescue, but Sarah's tactical training suggested otherwise. The enemy would expect her to move away from their position, not toward it. Sometimes the most dangerous path was also the safest. She chose the northern fork. The decision saved her life 30 minutes later, when she heard vehicles racing along the southeastern wadi, their engines echoing off the rocky walls. Her pursuers had anticipated her logical escape route and moved to intercept. Instead, she was working her way closer to their base of operations. staying parallel to their perimeter at a distance of roughly 2 miles. By early afternoon, the temperature had climbed past 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Sarah's flight suit was designed for climate-controlled cockpits, not desert survival. Sweat soaked through the flame-resistant fabric, and her water supply was already down to half. Desert survival doctrine called for minimal movement during peak heat hours, but staying stationary meant giving her enemies time to tighten their search net. She pressed on, rationing water to small sips every 30 minutes. The landscape was deceptively complex. What appeared from altitude to be flat desert was actually a maze of low ridges, rocky outcroppings, and dry stream beds. Sarah used every feature for concealment, moving from shadow to shadow like a predator stalking prey. At 3:15 p.m., she discovered something that changed everything. Hidden in a cluster of boulders, about a mile from the main enemy encampment, was an isolated observation post. 2 men with rifles and a radio setup had been left to watch the southern approaches. More importantly, they had positioned themselves next to a cache of weapons and supplies. Sarah studied the position for 45 minutes, noting their patrol patterns and equipment. The guards were disciplined but not particularly alert. They had settled into a routine, checking their radio every 15 minutes and taking turns scanning the horizon with binoculars. Between their observation sweeps, both men would retreat into the shade of a camouflage tarp stretched between the boulders. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cache contained what appeared to be American military supplies, MREs, water containers, ammunition boxes, and several long cases that could only contain rifles or crew-served weapons. Sarah realized she was looking at captured or stolen U.S. military equipment, possibly from overrun Iraqi government positions. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Sarah made her move. She approached from the blind spot behind the largest boulder, timing her advance during one of their radio check-ins when both guards were focused on their communications equipment. The first guard never saw her coming. Sarah's combat knife found the gap between his helmet and body armor with surgical precision, and he dropped silently to the ground. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner's equipment hitting the rocks. Sarah's Beretta coughed twice, the suppressed shots barely audible over the desert wind. Both rounds found center mass, and the man collapsed without raising an alarm. The weapons cache was better than she had hoped. Along with basic supplies, she found a Barrett M82.50 caliber sniper rifle with scope and bipod, plus 6 boxes of armor-piercing ammunition. The massive weapon was nearly 4 feet long and weighed close to 30 pounds, but it could engage targets at distances exceeding a mile. More importantly, it could penetrate vehicle armor and disable the trucks and armored cars she had seen at the main encampment. Sarah also discovered night vision goggles, tactical body armor in her approximate size, and enough MREs and water to sustain her for a week. The radio equipment included encrypted communication gear that might allow her to contact friendly forces without being intercepted. As she loaded equipment into a tactical backpack, Sarah's mind was already working through her next moves. The enemy would discover this outpost eventually, probably during the next scheduled radio check. She had perhaps 2 hours before they realized something was wrong. But now she had options beyond simple survival and evasion. Setting up the Barrett on its bipod, Sarah used the high-powered scope to conduct detailed reconnaissance of the main enemy position. What she saw confirmed her worst fears about the scale of the operation. Vehicle-mounted anti-aircraft guns, multiple rocket launchers, and what appeared to be chemical weapons storage containers suggested this was a major staging area for terrorist operations against coalition forces. The encrypted radio crackled to life with intermittent traffic. Most of the communications were in Arabic, but she caught fragments of English, call signs, coordinates, and references to American bases. Someone was feeding intelligence to these fighters, providing them with detailed information about coalition operations. As darkness fell across the desert, Sarah faced a choice that would define the rest of her ordeal. She could use her new equipment and advantageous position to call for extraction and wait for rescue. Or she could take the fight directly to an enemy force that clearly outnumbered her by at least 20-1. The radio and her captured equipment suddenly burst to life with a transmission that made her blood run cold. American voices, speaking in clear English, were coordinating with the enemy forces. They were providing real-time intelligence about ongoing search and rescue operations, including the call signs and approximate positions of the helicopters being sent to find her. Sarah realized with growing horror that someone in the coalition command structure was working with the enemy. Her rescue teams were flying into a trap, and she was the only person who could warn them. The Barrett's scope offered a clear view of the enemy's main communications array, centered around a large command vehicle approximately 800 meters from her position. One shot from the .50 caliber rifle could disable their primary communications and disrupt whatever operation they were planning. But taking that shot would announce her presence and bring the entire enemy force down on her position. Sarah would be trading her concealment and mobility for a chance to strike a decisive blow against a superior force. She chambered around into the Barrett and settled in behind the scope. The crosshairs centered on the communications array as she controlled her breathing and waited for the perfect shot. The war was about to become very personal. The Barrett's trigger broke clean at 9:23 p.m., sending a .50 caliber armor-piercing round screaming across 800 meters of desert night. The massive bullet struck the enemy communications array with devastating effect, transforming sophisticated radio equipment into sparking wreckage in a shower of metal fragments and electrical fire. Sarah didn't wait to admire her handiwork. The muzzle flash had announced her position to every enemy fighter in the area, and she had perhaps 90 seconds before they pinpointed her location and returned fire. She grabbed the Barrett and her equipment, abandoning the observation post for a rocky ridgeline 200 meters to the east. The enemy response was immediate and overwhelming. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions, tracers streaking through the darkness where she had been moments before. RPG rounds detonated against the boulders, sending shockwaves through the ground that she felt through her boots. They were firing blind, but with enough volume to make movement extremely dangerous. From her new position, Sarah could see vehicle-mounted searchlights sweeping the area around the destroyed outpost. The enemy was organized and well-equipped, but they had made a crucial, tactical error. By illuminating themselves with searchlights, they had turned their own vehicles into perfect targets for a sniper with night vision capabilities. Sarah settled the Barrett against a stable rock formation and activated the night vision scope. The thermal imaging revealed heat signatures from vehicle engines, weapon systems, and human targets moving in coordinated search patterns. She selected her targets methodically, first the searchlight-equipped vehicles, then the crew-served weapons that posed the greatest threat to any rescue helicopters. Her second shot disabled a technical truck mounting a .50 caliber machine gun, the heavy round punching through the engine block and sending superheated metal fragments into the crew compartment. The vehicle coasted to a stop, its occupants scrambling for cover as steam and smoke poured from the destroyed engine. The third shot took out a second searchlight, plunging a section of the enemy perimeter back into darkness. Sarah was systematically degrading their night fighting capability while remaining mobile and undetected. But she knew this tactical advantage was temporary. Eventually, they would bring enough firepower to bear on her general area to make her position untenable. 20 minutes into the engagement, she heard the distinctive sound that changed everything, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors approaching from the south. The rescue mission was still coming, despite the communications blackout she had created. Someone in the command structure was either unaware of the trap or was deliberately sending the helicopters into a killing zone. Sarah's captured radio equipment crackled with encrypted traffic as she tried to raise the incoming aircraft. Most military helicopters monitored multiple emergency frequencies, and she transmitted on all of them simultaneously. Rescue flight, this is Viper 77. You are approaching a heavily defended position with multiple SAM sites and crew-served weapons. Recommend you abort and establish a distant extraction point. I say again, abort your current approach. The response came through clearly on the encrypted channel. Viper 77. This is Rescue 11. We copy your transmission. Be advised we have clearance for this extraction from Command Authority. Provide your exact coordinates for pickup. Sarah's blood ran cold. Someone with Command Authority was still pushing the rescue mission forward despite her warnings about the enemy air defenses. The helicopter crews were being sent to their deaths, and she was the only person in position to prevent it. Through her night vision scope, she could see the enemy fighters repositioning their anti-aircraft weapons. Shoulder-fired missiles, vehicle-mounted guns, and what appeared to be a radar-guided SAM system were all being oriented toward the southern approaches. The incoming helicopters would fly directly into a concentrated air defense network. Sarah made a decision that went against every survival instinct she possessed. Instead of calling for extraction at a safe distance, she was going to single-handedly assault an enemy force to clear a landing zone for the rescue helicopters. Barrett's remaining ammunition gave her 18 more shots. She would need to disable or destroy at least 6 major weapons systems, while remaining mobile enough to avoid the inevitable counterattack. The mathematics were stark, but the alternative was watching American aircrews die in a trap. Her 4th shot destroyed the radar dish on the SAM system, rendering the missiles ineffective against low-flying targets. The 5th and 6th shots disabled 2 more technical trucks, their crews abandoning the vehicles as heavy rounds punched through armor plating and mechanical systems. By now, the enemy had triangulated her general position and was bringing concentrated fire to bear on the ridgeline. Sarah moved constantly, using the rocky terrain to mask her movement between firing positions. Bullets sparked off stone surfaces around her, and the distinctive whistle of incoming RPG rounds forced her to dive for cover repeatedly. The helicopters were getting closer. Through her night vision, Sarah could see the heat signatures of 2 aircraft approaching at low altitude, using terrain masking to avoid detection. They were flying directly into the killing zone, and she had perhaps 5 minutes to clear enough of the air defenses to give them a fighting chance. Her next 3 shots targeted the remaining anti-aircraft positions with surgical precision. Each round disabled vehicles or weapon systems, creating gaps in the enemy's defensive coverage. But the concentrated fire was forcing her to take increasingly desperate risks to maintain effective shooting positions. A mortar round detonated close enough to shower her with rock fragments and temporarily deafen her left ear. Sarah rolled to a new position and discovered her radio equipment had been damaged by shrapnel. She could still receive transmissions, but her ability to communicate with the rescue helicopters was severely compromised. That's when she heard the American voice again on the enemy's radio frequency, the same voice that had been providing intelligence earlier. The betrayer was directing the enemy fighters to specific positions, coordinating their fire to create an impenetrable defensive screen around the most likely landing zones. Sarah realized with growing fury that someone was using her rescue as bait to eliminate a helicopter crew that apparently knew too much about coalition operations. The entire scenario was an elaborate trap designed to eliminate witnesses to military intelligence operations that had gone wrong. With her 11th shot, Sarah targeted the enemy command vehicle where the traitorous communications were originating. The .50 caliber round penetrated the vehicle's armor and detonated something inside, probably ammunition or fuel, creating a spectacular fireball that illuminated the entire battlefield. The explosion seemed to break the enemy's coordination. Individual fighters began retreating from their positions, apparently unsure whether they were under attack by a single sniper or a larger force. Sarah used the confusion to reposition closer to the most likely helicopter landing zone, a relatively flat area about 400 meters from the main enemy encampment. Through her night vision, she could see the rescue helicopters were less than 2 minutes out. The lead aircraft was a UH-60 Black Hawk, followed by what appeared to be an AH-64 Apache gunship providing escort. Professional aircrews flying into a nightmare scenario that someone in their own command structure had created. Sarah chambered her 12th round and prepared for the most important shots of her military career. The helicopters needed a clear landing zone, and she was the only person who could provide it. But first, she had to survive the next 5 minutes against an enemy force that now knew exactly where she was positioned. The Black Hawk appeared over the southern ridge at exactly 10:47 p.m., its navigation lights dark and rotor noise masked by the rocky terrain. Sarah watched through her scope as the aircraft descended toward the improvised landing zone, completely unaware that 3 separate missile teams were tracking its approach from concealed positions. She had one chance to save the aircrew. Sarah's 12th shot struck the first missile team's position just as the operator was acquiring target lock. The .50 caliber round detonated their Stinger missile launcher, creating a brilliant flash that momentarily blinded everyone within 100 meters. The explosion triggered a chain reaction as stored missiles cooked off, eliminating an entire squad of enemy fighters in seconds. The Black Hawk pilot reacted instantly to the unexpected fireworks display, pulling into a steep climbing turn that threw off the aim of the remaining missile teams. But Sarah could see two more Stinger operators repositioning for clear shots at the helicopter's exhaust signature. Her 13th shot missed the second missile team by inches, the heavy rounds sparking off rocks behind their position. They had seen her muzzle flash and were already scrambling for new cover. Sarah worked the Barrett's bolt action, chambering another round as automatic weapons fire began converging on her position from multiple directions. The Apache gunship escort had identified the threat and was bringing its 30mm chain gun to bear on suspected enemy positions. Explosive rounds chewed through rocky outcroppings and vehicle positions, but the Apache pilot couldn't distinguish between enemy fighters and Sarah's position in the thermal chaos of the battlefield. Sarah's 14th shot found its mark, disabling the second Stinger team's launcher and sending its operators diving for cover. But the third team had already achieved missile lock, and she watched in horror as the Stinger streaked upward toward the Blackhawk's engine exhaust. The helicopter's countermeasures deployed automatically, chaff and flares blooming in the night sky like deadly fireworks. The missile lost lock and detonated harmlessly 50 meters from the aircraft. But the Blackhawk was now taking direct fire from multiple ground positions, green tracers reaching up from the darkness like deadly fingers. Sarah abandoned her sniper position and sprinted toward the landing zone, carrying the Barrett and her remaining equipment. The helicopter was attempting to land under fire, its crew chief returning fire with a mounted M240 machine gun. She had to reach the aircraft before the enemy could reorganize their defenses or bring heavier weapons to bear. A burst of Alaska 74 fire erupted from her left flank, bullets cracking past her head as she dove behind a low stone wall. 3 enemy fighters had positioned themselves between her and the landing zone, blocking her escape route. Sarah rolled to a prone position and brought Barrett to bear on the nearest target. The massive rifle's 15th shot vaporized the first fighter's cover and everything behind it. The .50 caliber round passed through a stone wall, a wooden crate, and 2 more fighters before embedding itself in the engine block of a technical truck. 3 enemies were eliminated with a single shot, but Sarah's position was now completely exposed. RPG rounds bracketed her location as she sprinted across open ground toward the Blackhawk. The helicopter was on the ground now, its rotors still turning as the crew chief provided covering fire. Sarah could see the pilot gesturing frantically for her to hurry. They were taking increasingly accurate fire and couldn't remain stationary much longer. That's when she heard the distinctive whine of an incoming mortar round. Sarah threw herself flat as the 82mm shell detonated 20 meters behind her, the concussion lifting her off the ground and slamming her back down with enough force to drive the air from her lungs. Shrapnel tore through her borrowed tactical vest, and she felt the warm wetness of blood running down her left arm. The Blackhawk's crew chief was screaming something she couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. Through blurred vision, Sarah could see enemy fighters advancing on her position from 3 directions, their weapons trained on her prone form. She was trapped in the open with nowhere to run and barely enough strength left to lift Barrett. The Apache gunship made the difference. Recognizing Sarah's position through her infrared strobe beacon, the Apache pilot brought his aircraft into a diving gun run that scattered the advancing enemy fighters. The 30mm chain gun hammered enemy positions with devastating accuracy, buying Sarah the precious seconds she needed to reach the helicopter. She stumbled the final 50 meters to the Blackhawk, the crew chief grabbing her equipment while the door gunner provided covering fire. As soon as Sarah was aboard, the pilot pulled pitch and the helicopter lifted off into the night sky, climbing rapidly to escape the ground fire. But their troubles were far from over. The enemy had been expecting this extraction, and they had prepared accordingly. As the Blackhawk cleared the immediate battlefield, Sarah heard the pilot's urgent radio transmission. Rescue 1-1, taking fire from multiple positions. We have unknown aircraft tracking from the northeast, requesting immediate air support. Through the helicopter's window, Sarah could see muzzle flashes erupting from positions scattered across several miles of desert. The enemy had established a gauntlet of anti-aircraft positions along every likely escape route. Someone with detailed knowledge of helicopter extraction procedures had planned this trap with military precision. The Apache escort was already engaging targets on the ground, its missiles and cannon fire lighting up the night sky. But Sarah realized with growing alarm that they were facing more than just ground-based threats. Her damaged radio equipment was picking up communications between enemy aircraft. At least 2 helicopters and what sounded like a fixed-wing aircraft were coordinating an intercept. The Black Hawk's defensive systems activated as radar emissions painted the aircraft from multiple directions. Someone had provided the enemy with sophisticated air-to-air capabilities, turning what should have been a routine extraction into a running aerial battle over hostile territory. Sarah looked at the Barrett rifle in her hands, 5 rounds remaining in a weapon designed for ground targets, not aerial combat. The helicopter's crew was professional and well-trained, but they were flying a transport aircraft against purpose-built fighters. The odds of survival were dropping by the minute. Through her headset, she heard the pilot's voice. "Viper 7-7, we're going to need every advantage we can get. That rifle of yours. Can it engage aerial targets?" Sarah studied the weapon's ballistics tables, taped to the stock. The Barrett M82 could theoretically engage helicopters at ranges up to 1,500 meters, but hitting a moving aerial target would require perfect timing and exceptional marksmanship. She had 5 chances to help save the aircrew that had risked their lives to rescue her. "Affirm," she replied, moving to the helicopter's open door. "Get me close enough for a clear shot." Quote, "The night sky erupted with tracers as enemy aircraft closed in from multiple directions." Sarah braced herself against the Black Hawk's doorframe and brought Barrett's scope to her eye, searching for targets in the darkness. The final phase of her ordeal was about to begin, and this time she would be fighting for her life, 500 feet above the desert floor. The first enemy helicopter materialized out of the darkness at 11:23 p.m., a Russian-made Mi-24 Hind gunship bristling with rockets and machine guns. Sarah watched through the Barrett's scope as the hostile aircraft maneuvered for an attack run, its pilot clearly experienced in air-to-air combat tactics. "Contact left, 800 meters," Sarah called over the intercom, tracking Hind's movement as it positioned itself for a broadside attack. The enemy pilot was smart. He was staying outside the effective range of the Black Hawk's door guns while setting up for a devastating rocket salvo. The Apache escort was already engaged with ground targets and couldn't break off to intercept. Sarah realized she was the only person in position to prevent the Hind from destroying their helicopter with its first attack run. Leading a moving aerial target with a rifle designed for stationary ground targets required calculations that went beyond normal ballistics. Sarah had to account for the relative speeds of both aircraft, wind drift at altitude, and the fact that she was firing from an unstable platform. Barrett's 16th round would need to travel nearly a kilometer through 3-dimensional space to intercept a target moving at over 200 kilometers per hour. She centered the crosshairs on the Hind's main rotor assembly, the most vulnerable target on the aircraft. A .50 caliber armor-piercing round through the rotor head would catastrophically destabilize the helicopter and force an immediate auto-rotation landing. The Barrett's trigger broke cleanly, sending the massive round streaking across the night sky. Sarah watched through the scope as the bullet passed just meters in front of Hind's nose, a near miss that startled the enemy pilot into a violent, evasive maneuver. But the shot had achieved its purpose. The Hind's pilot broke off his attack run and dove toward the desert floor, apparently unaware that he had been engaged by ground fire rather than another aircraft. The enemy pilot's radio chatter, intercepted by Sarah's damaged equipment, revealed confusion about the source of the incoming fire. Unknown aircraft, I am taking heavy caliber fire from an unidentified position," the Hind pilot transmitted in accented English. "Request immediate assistance to locate hostile fighters." Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the voice responding to the enemy pilot, the same American voice that had been coordinating with the ground forces. The betrayer was still active, still directing enemy operations against the rescue helicopters. "Be advised, friendly aircraft in your area are Black Hawk and Apache," the American voice transmitted. "Target the Black Hawk first. It contains high-value intelligence that cannot be allowed to reach coalition forces." The pieces of the conspiracy suddenly fell into place. Sarah wasn't just a downed pilot being rescued. She was a witness to something that powerful people needed eliminated. Her reconnaissance mission had uncovered more than just an enemy staging area. She had discovered evidence of collaboration between coalition personnel and terrorist forces, and someone was willing to kill an entire aircrew to prevent that information from reaching friendly territory. The second enemy helicopter appeared without warning, a smaller but more agile aircraft that swept in from the blind spot created by the Blackhawk's rotor noise. Sarah caught a glimpse of it through her peripheral vision. Another Hind, but this one equipped with air-to-air missiles instead of rockets. "Brake right!" she screamed into her headset, but the Blackhawk pilot had already seen the threat and was pulling the aircraft into a violent evasive turn that threw Sarah against the cabin wall. The enemy missile streaked past the Blackhawk's tail rotor, missing by less than 10 meters. Sarah struggled back to the open door as their pilot continued the evasive maneuver, diving toward a series of rocky canyons that might provide cover from further attacks. Through her scope, Sarah could see the second Hind maneuvering for another missile shot. This pilot was even more experienced than the first, staying in the Blackhawk's blind spots while maintaining optimal firing position. Sarah had 4 rounds remaining, and the target was now only 400 meters away, close enough for a guaranteed hit if she could time the shot correctly. But the Blackhawk's evasive maneuvers made accurate shooting nearly impossible. The helicopter was banking, diving, and climbing in random patterns to avoid missile lock, throwing Sarah's aim off with every course change. She needed the pilot to fly straight and level for just 3 seconds, enough time to line up a killing shot on the pursuing aircraft. "I need you to hold steady for a clean shot," Sarah transmitted to the pilot. 3 seconds of level flight, then you can resume evasives." "Negative," came the immediate response. "That bird has missiles with proximity fuses. 3 seconds of straight flight and we're all dead." Sarah realized she would have to take the shot under impossible conditions. From an aircraft pulling 2 Gs in a diving turn while engaging a target that was simultaneously maneuvering to avoid her fire. It was the kind of shot that existed only in Hollywood movies, not real combat. She braced herself against the helicopter's structural frame and brought Barrett to bear on the pursuing Hind. Instead of trying to track the target's movement, Sarah aimed at a point in space where the 2 aircraft's flight paths would intersect. She was shooting at where the target would be, not where it was. The 17th shot fired at the exact moment the Blackhawk's dive leveled out momentarily. Sarah watched the tracer streak toward the enemy helicopter, which was banking into a left turn to maintain pursuit position. The .50 caliber round struck the Hind's tail rotor assembly with devastating effect. The anti-torque rotor disintegrated in a shower of metal fragments, instantly destabilizing the aircraft. The Hind began spinning violently to the right, its pilot fighting desperately to maintain control as the helicopter auto-rotated toward the desert floor. The enemy aircraft impacted the rocky terrain in a ball of fire that illuminated the canyon walls for several seconds. Sarah had eliminated the second threat, but her ammunition was running critically low, with only 3 rounds remaining. The first Hind pilot had apparently witnessed his wingman's destruction and was now calling for additional support. Sarah's intercepted radio traffic revealed that at least 2 more aircraft were being vectored toward their position, including what sounded like a fixed-wing aircraft with sophisticated air-to-air capabilities. The Apache escort finally broke off from its ground attack mission and moved to provide close support for the Blackhawk, but Sarah could see through her night vision that the gunship had expended most of its ordnance against ground targets and was running low on ammunition. "Rescue 1-1, be advised we have additional bogies inbound from multiple vectors," the Apache pilot transmitted. "Recommend we egress to friendly territory immediately before they can establish an intercept." But the Blackhawk was still 40 miles from the nearest coalition base, and the pursuing aircraft were faster and more heavily armed. Sarah realized they would need to fight their way out of enemy airspace, and her remaining 3 rounds might be the difference between survival and destruction. The American voice on the enemy frequency was becoming increasingly desperate. All stations, the package must not reach friendly forces. Authorization granted for any measures necessary to prevent intelligence compromise." Sarah understood with crystal clarity that someone in the coalition command structure was willing to sacrifice an entire aircrew to cover up their collaboration with enemy forces. The rescue mission had become a death sentence, and she was the only person who could expose the conspiracy, if they could survive the next 20 minutes. The fixed-wing aircraft appeared on the horizon at 11:51 p.m., its silhouette unmistakably that of an L-39 Albatross trainer modified for light attack missions. Sarah's heart sank as she recognized the aircraft's capabilities. Armed with cannon and rockets, it could easily overtake and destroy both helicopters before they reached friendly airspace. "Fast mover, bearing 090, approximately 5 miles out," the Apache pilot reported, his voice tight with concern. "Looks like a trainer conversion, but it's armed and closing fast." Sarah studied the approaching aircraft through her scope. The L-39 was flying a textbook intercept course, positioning itself to attack from the Black Hawk's vulnerable rear quarter. Unlike the helicopters they had already faced, this pilot was flying with the precision of professional military training. The American voice crackled over the enemy frequency again. "Vector 97, you are clear to engage both helicopters. Ensure complete destruction. No survivors. No evidence." Sarah felt rage burning in her chest as she realized the full extent of the betrayal. Someone wearing the same uniform she wore was actively coordinating her murder and the deaths of the aircrew that had risked everything to save her. The conspiracy reached high enough into the command structure to authorize airstrikes against American personnel. "Black Hawk pilot," Sarah transmitted over the internal comm, "I need you to understand something. That aircraft is being directed by someone in our own command structure. This isn't just enemy action. We're being hunted by our own people." The pilot's response was immediate and professional. "Copy that, Viper 77. Whatever intel you've got, somebody really doesn't want it getting home. We'll make sure it does." The L-39 opened fire at maximum range, its 23mm cannon sending streams of explosive shells toward the fleeing helicopters. The Apache immediately broke off to engage, but the fixed-wing aircraft had a significant speed and altitude advantage. Sarah watched through her scope as cannon rounds bracketed both helicopters, forcing them into violent evasive maneuvers. The first Hind pilot had regrouped and was now attacking from a different vector, apparently coordinating with the L-39 to create a devastating crossfire. Sarah had 3 rounds remaining to deal with 2 enemy aircraft, and the mathematics of survival were becoming impossible. That's when she noticed something that changed everything. Through her night vision scope, Sarah could see the L-39's attack pattern was being coordinated through radio communications with a ground station. The aircraft would adjust its approach based on instructions from the American voice, creating a predictable rhythm to its attacks. If she could time her shot to coincide with one of these course corrections, she might be able to achieve the impossible shooting down a fighter aircraft with a sniper rifle. "Apache 27, can you force the fast mover into a predictable flight path?" Sarah transmitted to the gunship escort. "Negative, we're Winchester on Hellfires and running low on cannon ammunition," came the reply. "That bird's got too much speed advantage for us to dictate terms." Sarah made a decision that went against every tactical doctrine she had ever learned. Instead of engaging the more immediate threat from the Hind, she was going to attempt an impossible shot at the L-39 during its next attack run. The fixed-wing aircraft banked into its approach, following radio instructions to attack the Black Hawk from a shallow dive angle that would bring it within 600 meters of Sarah's position. She tracked the aircraft's movement through her scope, calculating lead angles and timing with mathematical precision. The American voice transmitted another course correction. "Vector 97, adjust approach 15 degrees left, and maintain current altitude for optimal firing solution." Sarah's 18th shot fired at the exact moment the L-39 began its course correction. The .50 caliber armor-piercing round streaked upward through the night sky, intersecting the aircraft's flight path just as the pilot banked into his final attack run. The massive bullet struck the L-39's port wing route, severing critical control cables and puncturing the aircraft's fuel system. The trainer-turned-fighter immediately rolled, inverted, and began shedding altitude in an uncontrolled spiral. Sarah watched through her scope as the pilot ejected seconds before the aircraft impacted the desert floor in a spectacular fireball. But her success came at a terrible cost. The remaining Hind pilot had used her distraction to achieve optimal firing position on the Black Hawk. Sarah watched in horror as the enemy helicopter launched 2 missiles simultaneously, both weapons tracking toward the rescue aircraft's engine exhaust. The Black Hawk's countermeasures deployed automatically, but one missile maintained lock despite the chaff and flares. Sarah had 2 rounds remaining and less than 10 seconds before the missile impact would destroy the helicopter and everyone aboard. The shot was impossible by any conventional standard. She needed to intercept a missile traveling at over 400 meters per second, while firing from an unstable platform at a target smaller than a coffee table. The Barrett rifle wasn't designed for anti-missile work, and the physics involved bordered on the supernatural. Sarah centered her crosshairs on the missile's exhaust trail and fired her 19th round. The .50 caliber bullet passed within inches of the missile's warhead but failed to achieve a direct hit. However, the projectile's passage through the weapon's flight path disrupted its guidance system just enough to cause a slight course deviation. The missile detonated 15 meters from the Black Hawk's tail rotor, close enough to shower the aircraft with shrapnel, but not close enough to destroy it. The helicopter lurched violently as shrapnel punctured hydraulic lines and damaged secondary systems, but the pilot maintained control. Black smoke began streaming from the engine compartment, and warning lights illuminated the cockpit like a Christmas tree. They were flying on borrowed time with a rapidly deteriorating aircraft. Sarah had 1 round remaining, and the Hind was positioning for a final attack that would finish them all. Emergency landing, the Black Hawk pilot transmitted. We're losing hydraulics and engine power, looking for suitable terrain for forced landing. Through her scope, Sarah could see they were approaching the border of coalition-controlled territory. Friendly forces were less than 10 miles away, but the helicopter wouldn't remain airborne long enough to reach safety. They needed to put down in potentially hostile territory and fight their way to friendly lines on foot. The Hind pilot apparently reached the same conclusion and was moving to prevent any ground escape. The enemy helicopter positioned itself to strafe the Black Hawk's landing zone, ensuring that anyone who survived the crash would be eliminated before they could reach coalition forces. Sarah braced herself for the most important shot of her life. 24 hours ago, she had been conducting routine reconnaissance in a multi-million-dollar stealth fighter. Now she was firing the last round from a captured rifle to save the lives of people who had risked everything to rescue her from a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military command. The Barrett's crosshairs settled on the Hind's cockpit as the enemy helicopter maneuvered for its final attack. Sarah controlled her breathing, squeezed the trigger with mechanical precision, and sent her 20th and final round toward a target that represented everything wrong with a war where allies could become enemies and heroes could become traitors. The .50 caliber bullet struck the Hind's armored windscreen and penetrated into the cockpit, instantly killing the pilot and sending the aircraft tumbling toward the desert floor. The explosion marked the end of the aerial pursuit, but Sarah knew their ordeal was far from over. The Black Hawk was going down in enemy territory, and somewhere in the coalition command structure, people with the power to order airstrikes were still working to ensure that neither Sarah nor her evidence of their treachery would ever reach friendly forces. But Captain Sarah Mitchell had survived 24 hours of hell, and she wasn't about to quit now. The Black Hawk struck the desert floor at 12:17 a.m. with the grinding crash of twisted metal and shattered glass. Sarah was thrown against the cabin wall as the helicopter skidded across rocky terrain for nearly 50 meters before coming to rest against a cluster of boulders. Emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows through the smoke-filled cabin as she checked herself for injuries. Miraculously, everyone survived the crash. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Thompson, was conscious but bleeding from a head wound. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, was trapped in her seat by twisted metal but alert and talking. The crew chief, Staff Sergeant David Chen, had suffered a broken arm but was already moving to secure the crash site. "Everyone sound off," Thompson called out, his voice strained but professional. "We need to establish a defensive perimeter and get that radio working. Command needs to know our situation." Sarah gathered her equipment and moved to assist the crew. The Barrett rifle was intact but empty, transformed from a precision weapon into an expensive club. Her sidearm still contained 2 full magazines, but against the forces that would inevitably converge on the crash site, 45 rounds wouldn't last long. Chen was already working on the helicopter's emergency radio, trying to establish contact with coalition forces. The crash had damaged most of their communication equipment, but the backup survival radio was still functional. Static filled the night air as he cycled through emergency frequencies, searching for friendly voices in the electronic wilderness. Any station, this is Rescue 1-1 down. Grid coordinates follow." Chen transmitted their position repeatedly, hoping someone in the coalition command structure wasn't part of the conspiracy that had nearly killed them. The response came faster than anyone expected, but it wasn't from friendly forces. "Rescue 1-1, this is Overwatch Control," transmitted the same American voice that had been coordinating with enemy forces throughout the night. We have your position and are dispatching immediate assistance. Maintain your current location and prepare for extraction. Sarah grabbed the radio from Chen's hands. Negative, Overwatch Control. Be advised we have evidence of compromise in command structure. Request authentication codes before accepting any assistance. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds before the American voice responded. Rescue 1-1. You are in no position to make demands. Accept extraction or face consequences of your situation. Thompson looked at Sarah with grim understanding. So whoever's been hunting us all night is still calling the shots. How do we tell the good guys from the bad guys when they're all wearing the same uniform? Sarah activated her damaged equipment and began scanning radio frequencies, searching for uncompromised coalition units. The intercepted communications painted a disturbing picture of the conspiracy's reach. Multiple call signs were coordinating search and destroy missions against their position, all authorized through official channels by personnel with legitimate command authority. We need to reach the 82nd Airborne Forward Operating Base at Checkpoint Charlie, Sarah explained to the crew. It's about 8 miles northeast, and Major Jessica Williams commands that sector. She's not part of whatever network is trying to eliminate us. Rodriguez, still trapped in her damaged seat, spoke up. How can you be sure she's not compromised? If this conspiracy reaches high enough to authorize airstrikes against American personnel, how do we know who to trust? Sarah pulled out her damaged recording equipment, which had been capturing enemy communications throughout the night. Because I've got 24 hours of intercepted transmissions that prove coordination between our command structure and enemy forces. Major Williams was specifically excluded from operational briefings about our mission. That makes her either completely clean or completely irrelevant to their plans. Chen finished his assessment of their defensive situation. We've got maybe an hour before enemy ground forces reach this position. The crash site is visible from several miles away, and they know exactly where we went down. Thompson made the command decision. We move out in 10 minutes. Grab essential equipment only, weapons, water, medical supplies, and that intelligence data. Everything else stays with the bird. As the crew prepared for the overland movement, Sarah worked frantically to extract data from her various recording devices. The evidence of conspiracy and collaboration with enemy forces was scattered across multiple systems, some of which had been damaged in the crash. She had perhaps 20 minutes to compile proof that would expose the betrayal before they had to abandon the site. The process revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. American personnel had been providing real-time intelligence to enemy forces for at least 6 months, facilitating attacks against coalition positions and Iraqi government facilities. The operation Sarah had photographed wasn't just an enemy staging area. It was a coordination point where American military intelligence was being passed directly to terrorist organizations. More disturbing was the discovery that her reconnaissance mission had been deliberately scheduled to coincide with the intelligence handoff. Someone wanted her to photograph the meeting, creating evidence that could be used to blackmail or eliminate the American personnel involved. Her shoot-down and rescue had been orchestrated from the beginning as a way to eliminate witnesses to the conspiracy. Got it, Sarah announced, transferring the compiled evidence to multiple backup devices. Enough proof to bring down everyone involved, assuming we can get it to people who aren't part of the network. The crew finished their preparations and moved out into the desert night, leaving behind the smoking wreckage of their helicopter. Thompson took point, followed by Rodriguez, who was mobile despite her injuries. Then Sarah and Chen providing rear security. They moved in tactical formation, using night vision equipment to navigate the rocky terrain while avoiding likely ambush sites. The first enemy patrol appeared 30 minutes after they left the crash site. Through her night vision scope, Sarah counted 6 vehicles approaching their former position, a mix of technical trucks and armored cars moving in coordinated search patterns. The enemy forces were organized and well-equipped, suggesting they had significant support from the compromised command structure. They're going to discover we're mobile within minutes, Thompson whispered over their tactical radio. Once they realize we're not at the crash site, they'll expand their search pattern to cover all likely escape routes. Sarah studied the terrain ahead through her scope. The most direct route to Checkpoint Charlie led through a series of valleys that would provide concealment but also create natural choke points where enemy forces could establish ambushes. Alternative routes across the ridgelines would be faster but would expose them to observation and long-range fire. We need to split up, Sarah decided. draw their attention in multiple directions, and reduce the chance they can eliminate all of us simultaneously. Rodriguez immediately objected. Negative. We stay together and fight as a unit. Splitting up just makes us easier targets. Sarah shook her head. Not if we coordinate our movements. I'll take the ridge route and draw their attention while you three use the valley approach. My equipment can create enough electromagnetic signatures to convince them the main force is moving along the high ground. Thompson considered the tactical situation. It's risky, but it gives us the best chance of getting that intelligence data to friendly forces. Are you sure you can handle multiple enemy patrols alone? Sarah checked her remaining ammunition and equipment. I've been doing it for the last 24 hours. Besides, I'm not planning to fight them. Just lead them away from your route and disappear when they get too close. The team split up at a rocky outcropping that provided concealment from multiple directions. Thompson's group headed northeast through the valley system, while Sarah climbed toward the ridgeline with her communications equipment and survival gear. Her plan was to create a false electronic signature that would convince enemy forces she was leading a larger group along the exposed high ground. For the next 2 hours, Sarah conducted a complex deception operation across 15 square miles of desert terrain. Using her radio equipment, she transmitted false communications that suggested a 4-person team moving along predictable routes. Enemy patrols responded exactly as she hoped, converging on positions she had already abandoned while the real rescue crew moved undetected through the valley system. But the deception couldn't last forever. Enemy forces had air assets that could cover large areas quickly, and Sarah's radio transmissions were being triangulated with increasing accuracy. By 3:30 a.m., she was being pursued by at least 12 vehicles and 2 helicopters in a coordinated hunt that was systematically eliminating her hiding places. Sarah found herself trapped on a narrow ridge with enemy forces approaching from 3 directions. Her ammunition was down to 2 magazines, and her escape routes were being systematically blocked by coordinated enemy movements. Worse, her radio intercepts indicated that Thompson's group had been detected and was now under pursuit as well. That's when she made the decision that would define the rest of her military career. Instead of continuing to evade, Sarah activated her emergency beacon and began transmitting in the clear on all coalition frequencies. This is Captain Sarah Mitchell, call sign Viper 77. I am transmitting coordinates of major enemy operations and evidence of conspiracy within the coalition command structure. All coalition units, be advised that American personnel are actively coordinating with enemy forces. The transmission was immediately jammed by enemy electronic warfare equipment, but Sarah had succeeded in broadcasting her location and a summary of her intelligence to anyone monitoring coalition frequencies. Within minutes, multiple friendly units were requesting authentication and additional information. More importantly, the conspiracy had been exposed. Sarah's open transmission forced the compromised personnel to reveal themselves by attempting to countermand legitimate rescue operations. The electronic warfare jamming that blocked her transmissions could only have come from coalition equipment, proving that American forces were actively supporting enemy operations. The response from legitimate coalition forces was immediate and overwhelming. A flight of F-16 fighters was diverted from a scheduled mission to provide close air support while a company of 82nd Airborne paratroopers began movement toward the area. Major Williams personally took command of the rescue operation, specifically excluding personnel who had been involved in the original mission planning. But Sarah's position was becoming untenable. Enemy forces had triangulated her transmission and were closing in from multiple directions. She had perhaps 20 minutes before they overran her position, and her ammunition wouldn't last long enough to hold them off until friendly forces arrived. The solution came from an unexpected source. Chen's voice crackled over her radio with coordinates for an emergency supply cache that had been established months earlier by Special Operations Forces. The cache was less than 2 miles from Sarah's position and contained weapons, ammunition, and communication equipment that could sustain her until rescue forces arrived. Sarah began moving toward the cache under cover of an artillery barrage called in by Major Williams. Coalition forces had finally identified legitimate targets and were systematically destroying enemy positions with precision fire. The conspiracy had been exposed, and the full weight of American military power was being brought to bear against the compromised operation. The supply cache was exactly where Chen had indicated, hidden in a rocky crevice and protected by camouflage netting that was nearly invisible to thermal imaging. Sarah found M4 carbines, ammunition, night vision equipment, and encrypted communication gear that allowed her to coordinate directly with incoming rescue forces. As dawn broke over the Iraqi desert, Sarah could see friendly helicopters approaching from the south while enemy forces retreated toward the Syrian border. The conspiracy had been broken, and the evidence she carried would lead to courts-martial and prosecutions that would reach the highest levels of military command. Thompson's voice came through clearly on the encrypted radio. "Viper 7-7, this is Rescue 1-1. We have visuals on your position and friendly forces inbound." "Outstanding work, Captain. Outstanding work." Sarah looked back across the desert landscape where she had spent the last 36 hours fighting for her life against enemies wearing both foreign and American uniforms. Her F-22 was destroyed, but the intelligence she had gathered would prevent future attacks and expose a network of traitors who had been selling American lives for personal gain. As the rescue helicopters touched down in a cloud of dust and rotor wash, Sarah realized her ordeal had transformed her from a routine reconnaissance pilot into something much more significant. She had become living proof that individual courage and determination could overcome institutional corruption and betrayal. The final radio transmission came from Major Williams as Sarah climbed aboard the rescue helicopter. "Welcome home, Captain Mitchell. Your country owes you more than it can ever repay." The helicopter carrying Sarah climbed steadily through the morning air, but her mind was already racing ahead to the challenges that awaited. The evidence she carried would trigger the largest military investigation in decades, and she knew the conspirators wouldn't surrender without a fight. During the flight back to Al Dhafra Air Base, Sarah used the aircraft's secure communication system to brief Major Williams on the full scope of what she had discovered. The intelligence revealed a network that extended far beyond the immediate operational area, involving personnel at multiple bases and possibly reaching into Pentagon-level planning departments. "Captain Mitchell," Williams transmitted over the encrypted channel, "we've already begun preliminary arrests based on your initial reports. Colonel Harrison has been relieved of command pending investigation, and at least 6 other officers are being detained for questioning." Sarah felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Colonel Harrison had been her squadron commander for 2 years, someone she had respected and trusted. The betrayal cut deeper than enemy bullets, striking at the foundations of military honor and loyalty that defined her entire career. The debrief at Al Dhafra took 18 hours spread across 3 days. Intelligence specialists, military investigators, and federal prosecutors examined every detail of Sarah's evidence with forensic precision. The recordings she had captured revealed communication patterns dating back 8 months, suggesting the conspiracy had been operating long before her reconnaissance mission. Captain Rebecca Foster from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations led the primary interrogation, a methodical examination of every radio intercept, photograph, and tactical decision Sarah had made during her ordeal. Foster was particularly interested in the timing of various events, seeking to establish whether Sarah's mission had been deliberately compromised or if she had stumbled into an ongoing operation. "The intelligence suggests your reconnaissance was specifically timed to document evidence against American personnel," Foster explained during one session. "Someone wanted photographic proof of collaboration, possibly for blackmail purposes or to eliminate witnesses who knew too much." Sarah studied the timeline charts and communication logs spread across the briefing room table. The pattern was clear once assembled. Her mission had been orchestrated to coincide with a major intelligence handoff, ensuring she would photograph American personnel meeting with known terrorist operatives. "They were planning to eliminate me from the beginning," Sarah realized. "The surface-to-air missiles were pre-positioned along my flight route. Even if I had completed the reconnaissance without incident, they would have shot me down during egress." Quote, "The investigation revealed that Colonel Harrison had been feeding operational intelligence to enemy forces for nearly a year, motivated by a combination of financial incentives and blackmail related to gambling debts incurred during off-duty travel. His co-conspirators included a communications officer who provided encryption keys, a logistics coordinator who ensured enemy forces had access to American weapons and equipment, and a flight operations planner who scheduled missions to maximize their intelligence value to hostile forces." The financial trail was extensive and sophisticated. Money had been laundered through multiple offshore accounts, defense contractors, and charitable organizations that existed only on paper. The investigation eventually traced over $2.3 million in payments to American personnel, representing hundreds of compromised operations and untold damage to coalition effectiveness. Sarah's role in exposing the conspiracy made her a target for retaliation from remaining network members who hadn't yet been identified. Security specialists assigned her a protective detail and moved her to a secure facility, while prosecutors prepared cases against the conspirators. The trials began 6 months later, generating international headlines and triggering reforms in military intelligence procedures. Harrison was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole after pleading guilty to treason and conspiracy charges. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 25 years to death, depending on their level of involvement and the damage their actions had caused. During Harrison's sentencing hearing, Sarah provided victim impact testimony that was later classified due to its sensitive intelligence content. She described the psychological impact of being hunted by people wearing the same uniform she had sworn to defend, and the lasting damage to trust between military personnel that such betrayals inevitably caused. "The enemy I fought in the desert was easier to face than the enemy I discovered in our own ranks," Sarah testified. "Foreign adversaries are expected to try to kill you. When your own people are coordinating that attempt, it strikes at everything we believe about service and sacrifice." The investigation also led to broader reforms in military intelligence sharing and operational security. New protocols required multiple authentication levels for sensitive missions, and communication intercept capabilities were enhanced to detect unauthorized coordination with hostile forces. Sarah was promoted to major and awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions during the 36-hour ordeal. The citation specifically noted her tactical innovation in using ground weapons against aerial targets and her decision to expose the conspiracy despite personal risk. But the experience had changed her fundamental relationship with military service. Sarah requested transfer to a training command position where she could educate other pilots about survival techniques and operational security. She developed new curricula for escape and evasion training that incorporated lessons learned from her desert ordeal. The F-22 program underwent extensive security reviews following the loss of her aircraft. While the stealth technology hadn't been compromised due to the aircraft's destruction, investigators wanted to ensure no classified information had been transmitted to enemy forces through the conspiracy network. Sarah's survival techniques became case studies at military academies and survival schools. Her improvised use of captured equipment, tactical deception operations, and adaptation to changing threats were analyzed by specialists who incorporated her innovations into official doctrine. 2 years after the desert ordeal, Sarah was selected to command a training squadron responsible for preparing pilots for combat operations in contested environments. Her first-hand experience with both foreign and domestic threats made her uniquely qualified to prepare aviators for the complex realities of modern warfare. The conspiracy investigation continued for 3 years, ultimately identifying 17 American personnel who had provided assistance to enemy forces. The network's reach extended beyond Iraq to include operations in Afghanistan, Syria, and other theaters where American forces were engaged. Sarah maintained contact with the aircrew members who had risked their lives to rescue her. Thompson was promoted to major and continued flying search and rescue missions. Rodriguez became a test pilot for new helicopter defense systems. Chen was awarded the Silver Star and transferred to Special Operations Training Command. The desert where Sarah had fought for her survival was eventually secured by coalition forces and transformed into a forward operating base. A memorial was erected at the site where her F-22 had crashed, honoring not only her survival but also the principles of military honor that she had defended against internal corruption. During a return visit to Iraq 5 years later, Sarah stood at the memorial and reflected on how the ordeal had shaped her understanding of service and sacrifice. The desert landscape looked peaceful in the afternoon sun, giving no hint of the life and death struggle that had played out across its rocky terrain. "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones you fight against people who should be standing beside you," she told a group of young pilots who had accompanied her on the commemorative visit. "But that makes it even more important to stand up for what's right, regardless of the personal cost." Sarah's story became required reading at military academies, not just for its survival lessons, but for its demonstration that individual integrity could overcome institutional corruption. Her decision to expose the conspiracy despite overwhelming odds inspired a generation of military personnel to maintain their ethical standards, even in the face of significant pressure to compromise. The final chapter of the conspiracy investigation closed 7 years after Sarah's ordeal, when the last co-conspirator was sentenced and the financial networks dismantled. The total cost to American military operations was estimated at over $50 million in compromised missions and lost equipment, but the damage to trust and morale was incalculable. Sarah continued her military career for another 15 years, eventually retiring as a brigadier general after commanding pilot training operations for the entire Air Force. Her legacy extended far beyond survival techniques to encompass leadership principles and ethical standards that influenced thousands of military personnel. The Barrett rifle she had used during her desert ordeal was recovered and placed in the Air Force Museum, where it serves as a symbol of resourcefulness and determination under impossible circumstances. A plaque beside the display quotes Sarah's own words, "Sometimes survival isn't about the weapons you carry, but about the principles you refuse to abandon." Quote. Looking back on that September morning when she had conducted what seemed like a routine reconnaissance mission, Sarah realized her true victory hadn't been surviving the enemy's attempts to kill her. Her real triumph had been exposing the corruption that threatened the integrity of military service itself, ensuring that future generations of warriors could trust the people fighting beside them. The desert had tested her survival skills, but the conspiracy had tested her character. In both cases, Captain Sarah Mitchell had proven equal to the challenge. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.